Hello, everyone, and welcome to Biohackers Lab. I'm your host, Gary Cohen, and on today's episode, I have Dr. Jeremy Howick. Dr. Howick has a PhD in the philosophy of medicine and is an award-winning Oxford philosopher and medical researcher. He has conducted groundbreaking studies about placebos and why we need unbiased experiments. He has over 80 published papers in top journals like The Lancet, British Medical Journal, and Annals of Internal Medicine. He is also the author of the textbook, The Philosophy of Evidence-Based Medicine, and his new book called Dr. You, Introducing the Hard Science of Self-Healing. Jeremy, thank you so much for coming onto the episode today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I got to listen to you recently at a seminar, and after listening to that talk and also reading your book, Dr. You, I knew I had to get you on because the kind of information you've got, I think, is really going to benefit people today. And our topic today is really what you study and research and publish about is how to heal yourself. So I think my first question for you then is, what got you so interested in how to heal yourself in your own personal case?
Yes, a few things happened to me in my own life that led me on a journey, an evidence journey that took almost 15 years now to complete, where I kind of had experiences where things happened to me. The first one was a herbal doctor offered ginger tea for some allergies I had, and that got my mind churning. Was it the ginger tea? Was it a placebo? That got me doing some research on the placebo effect. I've done studies with thousands of patients showing that placebos are almost as good, in some cases as good as drugs for many common things, including mild to moderate depression, pain, anxiety. Something else happened. I used to get very anxious before rowing races. I used to be a competitive rower, and yoga helped me reduce my anxiety. And I noticed that the side effect of reducing the anxiety was that I became happier. I wasn't depressed or anything, but it made me happier. It turns out that this relaxation response can deactivate some systems in your body, the sympathetic nervous response, which is great for fighting, but not good for self-healing. And most recently, I had a knee pain, knee injury. They did a scan. They found that there were some lesions on the cartilage in the bone. They recommended a surgical procedure. I thought, well, I'm just writing this book on self-healing. I can't do the surgery right away, so I did physiotherapy instead. And my knee got better to the point where I ran my first marathon a few months ago. So those are the kinds of things that got me going, and my mind got wondering. I'm a kind of an inquisitive person by nature. So I've done, as you mentioned, over 80 studies, published 80 publications. I've taught it. I've seen it happen. And I'm convinced that there are things we can do to heal our own bodies without drugs or other medical interventions.
So do you think then that modern society is maybe in a place where it's kind of forgotten that you can heal yourself, that we maybe try outsource that too much to either practitioners or devices or pharmaceuticals or supplements or something? We've kind of forgotten that actually there's this amazing system within the body that can actually heal itself.
Yes, it's kind of a paradox because on the one hand, modern medicine is fantastic. It's wonderful. It's undoubtedly as close to a miracle as you might get. Antibiotics for some serious bacterial infections, rabies vaccines, insulin for some kinds of diabetes. But because it's so amazing, we've come to overuse it and over-rely on it. Whereas before modern medicine, the good doctors knew that all they really had was what they call their bedside manner. They kind of comfort the person and just sit beside them, make them feel at ease while their body healed itself, and kind of help that procedure by reducing anxiety and so on. So now, because modern medicine is so great, we're overusing it. It's the same thing as, you got your smartphones and so on. They're wonderful for keeping in contact with people, but we overuse them. We use them as alarm clocks. They wake us up in the morning and we get these messages and emails thrown at us. We never escape from our emails. So it's like many things which are good if used sensibly, but we're not wise enough to use them sensibly.
So I think a common theme I was reading in your book there was about the immune system and inflammation. Could you maybe just explain to people then how could they help heal their own immune system and reduce inflammation?
So I talk more about the immune system than inflammation per se, although they are related. Basically, under an acute stress, if you're being kind of scared by a wild animal, our cave ancestors, if they were frightened by a saber-toothed tiger or a wolf, there's a question there. If you're in that situation, do you want any resources, any energy going towards digesting food or even fighting an illness? Or do you want all your energy diverted towards being able to run as fast as you can or if need to fight? Now, the answer is obviously you want all your resources devoted to the ability, to your fighting muscles, and your eyes should be able to see better. And so when you don't want to waste your time kind of healing, getting rid of some virus or bacteria in that moment. You don't want your immune system to be active in that time in a way it shouldn't be. Like many things with the human body, it's more complex than the simple story I just gave, but basically that's right. I mean, under an acute stress situation, your immune system basically is suppressed. And that's a good thing. The problem is that now there are no saber-toothed tigers and very few of us encounter wolves, but when something happens, our boss gets upset with us, we have a fight with our partner, we're worried about something, that same system gets activated that helps us fight, but we don't need to physically fight and suppresses the immune system. The antidote to all that is relaxation response. By relaxing, you kind of boost the immune system relative to when it's stressed out.
Okay. Yeah, because I have a keen interest in, I believe it's a branch of medicine called psychoneuroimmunology or psychoneuroendocrinology.
Mm-hmm.
And, I always found that funny that it was a field that's basically saying, the way that you're feeling and the way that you're thinking does actually cause physical ailments in you. And we can try to prove that through various methods. And I mean, that's just feeding back into what you're saying there, where a problem, it seems like, in the world is that we've got all these saber-tooths, but they're not saber-tooths, they're virtual saber-tooths. And they, in whatever way that people are feeling overwhelmed. And actually, it sounds like a big contributing factor as to what's maybe exacerbating an illness or a condition. And it might be a reason that when you're trying to solve a problem, you might stall or plateau because you're not dealing with this other element. And so that's why I love the kind of tips that you give in your book there. So I think another nice one might be the Dr. Barley's story. So your yoga teacher that's transformed your life. Could you just explain that situation?
Yeah, he's 94 years old now, and I just saw a YouTube video. He's had traveled to some other country, Toronto, to give a festival. He's an amazing guy. I met him in 1993. At that time, I had just failed to make the Canadian rowing team in my first trial. And I was obviously devastated. And I thought that one thing I could do, I'd reached my physical limits. I mean, I had trained like a maniac and so on, but I thought, well, if I can just focus a bit more during the key races, if I can control my mind a bit better, I'll be able to perform better. And so I'd heard these stories about crazy yogis in India doing wild things like standing on one leg for years on end. And I didn't really believe them, but I wanted to believe them. So I sought out a traditional yoga teacher. I wasn't looking for the kind of yoga which is physical postures, which is wonderful, by the way, but at the time I didn't need any additional physical fitness. I was very fit. I wanted someone to teach me these traditional things. And I found him via my mother. She kind of knew those kind of people. And I went to his studio. It was just his living room in a modest flat. His wife was cooking Indian food in the next room. And I fired a bunch of questions at him. How does this work? Where'd you get your PhD? What do you mean the mind affects the body? What are you talking about? This inner healing, inner pharmacy. I was very skeptical, but he was very patient, answered all my questions. And after a while, I ran out of questions. At which time he said, well, you know what? Why don't you try the class? The first class is free and you see for yourself. So I tried the class, and first of all, I was impressed at how strong he was. But more than that, I was amazed at how blissed out I felt at the end, how relaxed I felt, how focused, how clear everything seemed. And I thought to myself, well, if I can learn to do that in the rowing, I'll be able to perform better and win more races, which I eventually did. I made the Canadian team the next year. He had also helped the Montreal Canadiens, the ice hockey team, win a Stanley Cup one year. So I wasn't the first athlete he'd helped out.
Okay. So I'm just interested there. What's the difference then between the yoga that I think most of us think about, as you said, with the postures versus the kind of yoga that you got to experience? What is the difference there?
Yeah. So the first thing to repeat again, I'm not criticizing the different styles. They're all wonderful. Um, the fact is that most yoga we do and involves great physical postures, and those wonderful physical postures will do what they're designed to do. They'll make you physically fitter. And because the mind and body are connected, I hope we touch on that a bit more. I mean, anytime you do a physical exercise, you are working on your mind as well. However, the yoga system as a holistic system has 8 levels, and they involve physical postures as well as certain behaviors, moral behaviors, as well as relaxation, breathing techniques, and at the higher levels, different stages of meditation. And those are where you really get the deeper benefits of yoga is through the meditation. In fact, one of the first people who brought yoga to North America 150 years ago only taught one posture, just sitting up straight. He didn't teach any of those fancy physical, sun salutations and warrior poses that we see now.
Okay, yeah, because I'm just thinking if people want sort of the biggest bang for their buck initially, it sounds like it's the meditation side of things that might give you access to some of that, and then but the postures are just not an added benefit, a part of the ritual, I guess, to get you in the flow state.
Yeah, that's one way of looking at it. Another way is if you do the postures in a traditional yoga setting like mine, you could think of it as meditation in motion. Because if you tell most people, you know what, sit down for 20 minutes and just watch your breath come in and out, they just can't do it. But if you say, kind of, you relax them a little bit, then give them some simple physical postures to do mindfully while they're breathing, they kind of enter that state without trying.
Mm.
So in a way, it's a trick to get into it. So
Okay.
it's all together in a way, basically.
Yeah. So would you then maybe explain a little bit about the difference between expectations and conditioning? Because I think does that lead into the mind-body connection a bit better for people to understand?
Yeah. So the mind body, basically, we often speak of things. We say, well, that's just physical or that's just psychological. And I can't think of a single thing which is just psychological. And almost nothing is just physical. And expectation is when you have, let's say, a conscious belief. Let's say Gary, we trust him. He says, you know what? He tells me at the end, you tell me that was a great interview. If I believe you, I'm going to feel better. So I have an expectation that, hey, it's going to be a great interview when I finally hear it. And that positive expectation will change my brain in such a way that my body produces its own chemicals, its own feel good chemicals like endorphins and dopamine. So that's about positive expectations. And I can give those to myself. If I have, let's say, back pain, the fact is most back pain goes away or is reduced within 3 weeks. So instead of panicking, if I tell myself it's going to get better in 3 weeks, or someone else tells me it's going to get better within 3 weeks, that can create a positive expectation and cause my brain to produce its own pain-killing chemicals like endorphins. That's that's all at the conscious level, my conscious explicit belief. Conditioning is what happens at a subconscious level. The famous studies were with Pavlov. We've all heard the term Pavlov's dogs. Pavlov rang a bell, then fed the dogs, and then repeated that several times. After a while, he would just ring the bell, and they began salivating. So the same thing can happen to us. I mean, if I have a great conversation with you and that we enjoy it together, then even subconsciously anticipating my next conversation with you will make me feel good because it's been a positive experience several times in a row. This can happen to our health as well in the other way. I mean, if certain situations at work or at home are repeatedly negative and induce a stress response, then just the thought of that situation can induce a stress response.
Mm.
And the difference between conditioning and expectancy that I like to focus on is one is conscious, the other is subconscious. So one is more in our control than the other one.
So this is a point where I always like to take ideas and make them actionable so that anyone can try and even do them today. So what would be your tip then for someone who's trying to heal themselves from an expectation point of view? What kind of language do they need to use there?
Yes, well, a positive message. That's the simplest one. Just tell yourself, I'm feeling much better, or I'm going to feel very much better very soon. If you want to get a bit more complicated and take a few minutes instead of just a few seconds, there are some wonderful positive psychology exercises you can do. For example, write a letter to yourself, a self-compassion letter. Write a letter to yourself about everything that's going to go well in the next short time, and then reflect on that.
Okay. And then when it comes to the conditioning side, I'm thinking here, is that kind of like the benefit when you go to social groups or you go to a gym, that you're in a positive environment? Is that the kind of line we need to do to activate those pathways?
Absolutely. There are two things you can do. One is, you know what kind of environments make you feel good, and which ones don't. Just go somewhere that makes you feel good. Go talk to someone that makes you feel good. You've been conditioned to feel good around those situations. Something else you can do is, whenever you succeed at something, no matter how small, give yourself a little reward. Condition yourself. So, today I published a paper, came out in the Canadian Medical Association Journal. I'm going to reward myself. I'm going with my wife and our child on a date night. Hopefully he won't cry too much. So kind of rewarding yourself that way, when you succeed, it kind of leads you towards that positive emotion. So I'm conditioning myself to feel good when good little things happen.
Yeah, I read that in your book, how when you accomplish different tasks, you give yourself set rewards. And so that creates that positive feedback cycle that, okay, I'm going to get that good feeling come out of this, even out of a tough situation.
Yeah.
Okay. And moving on from that then, you in your book too, you talk about empathy. So I think this is kind of leading with the conditioning side of things. And this is more to do with the language that your doctor talks to you. And I think that is so powerful. So when a lot of people listening will have consulted different healthcare practitioners, looking for results from various ailments, what are your findings when it comes to empathy?
Yes. So previously, people thought of doctors who were friendly and offered, honest hope, that was just a fuzzy thing. What I've done with my research is I've taken that thing which was previously fuzzy and quantified its benefits in the same way we quantify the effects of drugs. I found that doctors who offer empathic and positive communication can improve conditions ranging from, length of hospital stay and lung function to pain, patient satisfaction, and even quality of life by a modest but important amount. And if there are doctors out there who are doing this, wonderful. What you're doing is fantastic, and it's evidence-based. It's not kind of against evidence. It is evidence-based. If you're a patient, seek out a doctor who's empathic and positive. This doesn't mean you should look for a friendly idiot. And fortunately, there are many doctors who are both empathic and aware of the evidence. And in fact, you can't really be an evidence-based doctor without empathy, because to make the right diagnosis, you've got to understand the patient, and the understanding requires empathy. So it's important to think of empathy as evidence-based, as opposed to evidence-based medicine. So for doctors, they should carry on doing it or emphasize it, and patients should seek out doctors which do offer that kind of care.
Yeah, you give so many good examples in your book there of evidence that shows how much empathy can improve a patient's outcome, and it just was fascinating. Just the language that the practitioner uses when they deliver the diagnosis or they deliver the prognosis and the treatment plan is incredible.
I've seen it with my own two eyes. I've been, as part of a study, so we'd all have the right ethical approval. I've watched doctors who are trained in empathy. I train them in empathy, go on to treat patients. They come in tears due to some kind of pain. It's often back pain, shoulder pain, or knee pain. But these problems lead to psychosocial problems, like they can't pick up their child, they can't play with their grandchild, they can't mow the lawn, they can't help their wife, they can't help their husband. So this worry exacerbates the pain, because it's a stressor. So the doctor that takes the time to understand these things, to offer some simple tips and tools, the patients leave smiling and their pain goes away. Not just their anxiety goes down, their pain goes down as well. So it can really be incredible. It doesn't cure all kinds of pain, but it really offers a great benefit in many cases. And nowadays, with this opioid crisis, prescription painkillers kill more people than heroin and cocaine combined in the U.S. every year. The problem is not just the U.S., it's in Africa, it's in the UK. So having something else we can offer, which is, just takes a bit more time, and that it only has positive side effects. We should really emphasize these things instead of ignoring them.
And is that maybe a part of the problem now, again, talking about where society is going wrong, is just that doctors, I believe you talked about it in your talk that I was at, it's just like the burnout syndrome, that they're being time constraints, that they're being squeezed, especially in the NHS in the UK. And is that what's sort of causing a deterioration in empathy that would naturally have been in that person, but they got no time for it?
Human beings, unless they're psychopaths or unless they're severely autistic, we all have empathy. Doctors go into the profession, the vast majority of them, because they want to help people. But it's driven out of them with a kind of budget constraints and top-down management, where my doctor colleagues claim they're spending between a third and two-thirds, so between 30 and 60% of their time doing paperwork, filling out forms. They've got to stare at a screen while they're talking to a patient. Now, this stuff doesn't help, and they're leaving the profession in droves. First of all, there's a high suicide, even they call it an epidemic among young doctors. They're so stressed out because of the workload they're being given. And then they're leaving to work for consultancies and so on, where they can make more money without all the stress. And it's unsurprising given the conditions they're put in. And I mean, I don't know the solution to this. I'm looking into it with some colleagues in the Oxford Internet Institute to see how we can use technology to enhance the kind of patient-doctor relationship. But it's a big problem, and it's not helping doctors or patients.
And so carry on with the empathy side, because it seems so powerful, the way that people talk to one another, the effect it has on each other. So we just talked about the doctor-patient relationship, but this also, I think you touched on earlier, is the relationships that we have even at home or with work colleagues. So if someone who's listening wants to help a loved one, you would say that you can actually enhance the healing of the loved one in the way that you talk to them. It is good to give them positive messages.
It's even deeper than that, Gary. So social isolation is as bad for us as smoking. It removes on average 5 years from our lives. And the contrary is also true. I mean, good social relationships, if you feel close and are close to your friends, family, and social groups, you're going to live on average 5 years longer. So the takeaway from that is simple. If you feel isolated, join some group. It's quite, social media can be bad for people in many ways, but it's also good. There's whatever your interest or hobby is, there's some group you can join. If you're religious, it's easier often. If you're Muslim, go to a mosque. If you're Jewish, go to the synagogue. Christian, go to some church. They often have groups that are there ready to help you. If you know someone who's isolated, reach out to them by all means. You're helping them just by reaching out and saying, hey, what can I do? Can I do something small for you? There you get a double benefit, because you are improving their health. But there's emerging evidence that when you do something nice for somebody else, an altruistic act, you're also boosting your own mental health and well-being. So, if you're feeling isolated, there's very few situations where you can't do anything about it, even with the simplest of technologies. Reach out to some group. And if you know someone who's isolated, don't wait. Send them a text, give them a call, or better, visit them today, because you're doing yourself and them a huge favor.
And I think that feeds back into why also support groups are so important. So when, on this podcast, we talk a lot about diet and nutrition and other elements, but when you assign yourself to a specific way of eating, it's like you join a support group, because you mix it amongst other like-minded people and you get to talk to them. So I think from the evidence that you're sharing here is that would sort of feed into helping to improve your health, because you're finding support from other people versus maybe someone going, you're crazy eating that, or why are you doing that, or something. Is that, it sounds like that's what happens?
Yes. I mean, no doubt a lot of these diets will have independent benefits. However, a great, like you said, I mean, a lot of the benefit might come from this social support they're getting. So yes. And the other thing, I mean, social support, if you think about how it works, there's a few different hypotheses. The two hypotheses I think are most evidence-based. The first one is the direct effects. Let's say you and I become friends and something happens to you, and I know where you can get help. I can point you directly in a direction that'll help you. That's called the direct effects model. Other one is it reduces stress. If I know I can count on you and you know you can count on me, I'll feel less stressed out about it. So these people on diets who are part of a social network, their stress will be lower. And lower stress helps them digest. We all talk about what we put in our mouths. What about what goes out? If you're under stress, you're not digesting your food, literally not digesting your food. They've proven this in numerous studies. And we know this from our own experience. If you're hungry and all of a sudden someone screams at you, you forget that you're hungry. It's not just that you forget mentally you're hungry, your body stops producing the gastric juices that lead to your hunger. So that's probably a big part of it. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you've just got me thinking too, when people are working and they're trying to grab lunch, but they're in a stress state and they're just, they're thinking about work. In a way, they're not actually getting the best nutritional benefit out of their lunch because they're probably activating that sympathetic fight and flight response whilst they're trying to consume some nutrition.
So yes, this was discovered. Pavlov, the same guy with Pavlov's dogs, was doing tests with dogs measuring their gastric juices. And then suddenly he made a surprise discovery. When the dog next to one, if he was experimenting on one dog, if a different dog was barking very loudly beside him, the dog would stop producing gastric juices. And Walter Cannon found that with humans, it's the same thing. So you might have the greenest, most organic smoothie for lunchtime, but if you're under stress, you're not digesting those nutrients. So I'm not saying you should grab a McDonald's instead, but think about, what's going in has to be digested to be absorbed. And to digest and absorb, you've got to be more relaxed.
And so is that sort of a tip that you might suggest to someone from the mindfulness point of view or the meditation point of view, that before you sort of consume, this is how you link in mindfulness, that you sort of take time to reflect and go, all right, let me just try reset quickly before I eat. Like, I don't want to be lost in thought here and just mindless whilst I'm trying to consume my food.
Yes, that's why in many traditions, if it's a religious tradition, they'll do a little prayer first. What that does is, whether you're religious or not, if you can think of some kind of ritual to do before, it just slows you down and takes your mind away from your problems, away from the internet, to focus on gratitude for the food you're going to receive. And you don't need to be religious, and even in Buddhism, which is where mindfulness comes from, there's no God there, so it's not the same thing as religion. Just some kind of ritual you can think of for yourself, where you slow down, take 1 or 2 or 3 deep breaths, conscious breaths. That's enough.
And that's what I love about this, talk about Silicon Valley style, this is scalable. You could do this anywhere in the world as many times as you want. It's so easy to implement, but the benefits you can get from just doing this can enhance things. It's all about what we're talking about, how to heal yourself. And I love that. Could you also just explain then, I found it fascinating in your book, there was one point that caught my attention, was the yoga and the glucose control. Just thinking, how does yoga, there's actually research that shows yoga improved the glucose response in type 2 diabetics, I believe.
Well, you see, the stress that's via the stress response. But yoga seems to have induced the stress response, and that affects the symptoms and causes of diabetes. So first of all, someone's less stressed. We all talk about stress eating, and then stress eating. So when I'm very anxious, I tend to crave sweet things, and many people have the similar experiences. Others don't eat enough. So our appetite is related to how stressed we are, and yoga reduces stress. The other thing is that, yes, the stress response, the sympathetic nervous system is connected to how much insulin we produce. So, in the different body organs and so on. So by relaxing ourselves, we do influence that. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, no, I just found it because, especially with the world and type 2 diabetes escalating, it just thought, oh, here's another health way of improving the situation with a diabetic.
Yes.
Yeah. So, also you talk about in your book genetics, and a lot of people might think, oh, I'm destined for this situation because of my genetics. Do you have a view on that?
Genetics are important, but it's related to an age-old debate of nature versus nurture. How much of my health problems am I born with? How much did I develop because of my habits? And the Genome Project seemed to weigh in heavily on the nature side. Well, anything wrong with you, it's your gene. And therefore, to fix the problem, we got to tinker with this little gene and we'll fix the problem. Well, they were disappointed because they found that there are very few diseases that are related to a specific gene, almost none. So Angelina Jolie famously found that she had the a gene related to the expression of breast cancer, the BRCA1 gene, and her doctors claimed she had a high chance. I think it was a 70% chance or so of getting breast cancer. In fact, that's not quite right. Her doctors might have given her, misleading information, perhaps unintentionally, but it's more like 50%. So even a gene which has been identified as being correlated with a specific kind of cancer, it's still 50%, environmental. Yet, in spite of that, if you look at Cancer Research UK, they acknowledge that about 2 or 3% of their funding is spent on environmental research, whereas they also acknowledge that 43% of the cause of cancers are environmental causes. What we eat, different things in our pollution, what we eat, and so on, lack of exercise. So it's important to remember that, yes, genes are important, but don't believe that they determine absolutely any disease at all, really. And there are very few exceptions. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly not cancer and heart disease and so on.
Okay, yeah. And, what you're saying there also backs up. I've had one previous guest, Alison Gannett. She had a severe brain tumor. Her story was amazing. And yeah, she's still alive to this day. I think she was only meant to have 3 months to live. And how many years later now she's still here, but she implemented lifestyle changes as a part of her healing process. So, it was an incredible story to say, yeah, you've beaten all the odds.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, there's a whole study. It's called Anecdotes or Cases of Radical Remission. I forget who published the book, but they document cases where their diagnosis is so bad that they give them 3 or 6 months to live or a year to live, and they recover completely. There are dramatic cases like that. Yes, and most of them report doing certain things to change the way they live to help that radical remission.
So I'd like to also just touch on for any of the healthcare practitioners listening or the doctors.
Yes.
Should they prescribe placebos?
I don't think it's unethical to prescribe placebos for the following reason. Even if you give someone a placebo and tell them it's a placebo, you say, this is a sugar pill, which is a placebo, it still seems to work because of conditioning. You see, when you go to visit the doctor you trust, then you engage in the ritual of taking the pill. That seems to affect our biochemistry in a way that can help to cure or reduce the symptoms of many common things like pain, depression, anxiety, and so on. So I don't think it's unethical because you don't have to lie. However, I don't think doctors have, boxes of placebo pills lying around, and they might still be worried because they might think, well, even though I'm not lying to the patient might misunderstand, which is also possible. But the good news is that you don't need a placebo pill to induce a placebo effect. It suffices to give a positive message. So I think that doctors all should, yes, know that offering the patient hope and being empathic, this induces what many call placebo effects. That's not just a fluffy thing you do as an add-on. That's a core part of evidence-based medicine. And the effects of these things have been quantified. And the only thing to add is that some doctors wonder, well, I don't want to lie to my patient. I don't want to give them a positive message when there's nothing positive to say. And that's right. You don't want to lie to the patient. And it can be tricky in some cases if the prognosis is very bad to offer hope, to give a positive message. However, in many cases, it's easy. So if a patient has some mild to moderate pain, this fluctuates. Back pain, most of it goes away. So telling them, well, most patients in your situation get much better soon. That's not a lie. And in the tricky cases where the prognosis is bad, let's say it's stage 4 cancer, well, in those tricky cases, you can still find something to be hopeful about. We're going to find the best solution for you. We're going to manage your pain. So there's always, even in the more tricky cases, there's something to be positive about.
It sounds like as long as you're being supportive in your tone and the words that you
Yeah,
use,
yeah,
it's going to help the patient. Because
yeah,
it also feeds into when in the stories there in your book you were talking about even placebo surgical procedures and how effective they can be, and
yeah.
it just gets me thinking. So, which patients would benefit from placebo? How would you give any tips as to which people you think would benefit from getting a placebo?
Well, the first thing is most people think I'm very smart. It wouldn't work on me. It involves deception, and it can't work on me. And they've tried to predict who will respond to placebo and who won't, and they haven't gotten very far. I mean, they found some correlations with certain traits, but they have not been able to find some kind of causal factors. Um, I'm sure I've responded to a placebo. I don't think I've knowingly taken any placebo medication, but in my rowing career, I mean, my first coach told me, "You're going to be a champion." He had no reason to say that. I was too short to be a good rower, but I believed it. And that belief led me to engage in behaviors, in other words, hard training, which led to me winning a few races. Um, so we shouldn't think we're too smart to respond to a placebo. We're all susceptible to it potentially. And with surgery, yes, I mean, most people, if they offer you surgery for knee pain, back pain, or shoulder pain, the evidence suggests that the placebo surgery works as well as the real thing for most of those cases. So instead of engaging in the more expensive, more invasive, more potentially dangerous surgery, you should consider other options, the physiotherapy and so on, that will cure yourself as well as the placebo surgery.
I'm sure some people listening to this, hopefully we haven't confused them, but using the word placebo. If you wouldn't just recap quickly, what is a placebo for anyone who's not medically trained?
Yeah, I should say that also. Just because I said that physiotherapy might help for these things, I don't mean that physiotherapy is a placebo. And a placebo means many things. It's an umbrella term that encompasses sugar pills, salt water or saline injections, um, attention controls and psychotherapeutic interventions, and placebo surgery. So, placebo knee surgery, for example, the real surgery involves arthroscopic surgery, involves a small incision in the knee, and then lavage, so basically cleaning up the cartilage and bone around there to avoid the inflammation. The placebo surgery would involve just the incision and then sewing up the incision without doing the lavage, without kind of going in there and cleaning up the cartilage and bone. Um, and then not telling the patient. The patient thinks I might be getting the real thing or I might be getting the placebo, but I don't know which I'm getting.
Hmm. And so when someone's hearing that, going, hang on, did you just say that a doctor can cut me, stitch me up, and I think they've done the surgery, and my knee will actually get better? Like, how does that work? Because they would think, I've seen the x-rays, it looks horrible, it's sort of go up and down the stairs. How come it feels better now?
Well, like I said, it happened. Something similar happened to me. The scan they had for me showed such bad damage to numerous injuries. They recommended surgery, yet physiotherapy and some simple yoga techniques I used got me to the point where I ran a full marathon. I weighed 90 kilos. It was kind of quite onerous on my knee. Um, so how does that work? I think there are different mechanisms. First of all, the reason we think it can't work, the reason our mind is blocked is that we think of the mind and body as separate. So we think of the knee, we think, well, it's a mechanical problem, like a car problem. It needs a mechanical solution. Well, once you realize that the mind and body are connected, it becomes easier to see how, or to at least to fathom how, placebos can work. And the way it works specifically for knee, back, and shoulder surgery is I think the incision induces the wound healing cascade. Your body doesn't know whether it's a friendly surgeon doing the incision or some kind of bite from a hostile animal. So your body sends new tissue there. It has you get an endorphin release, a pain killing release, etc. So your body can heal itself mechanically. Just like when you have a scratch, your body sews itself back up the same way a surgeon would. That's a mechanical reconstruction. So similar things can happen to the knee, back, and shoulder. The other thing is that your beliefs. If you believe things are getting better, you might, instead of holding your shoulder all the time, for example, and not moving it, you might begin to move it in gentle ways, and the movement can help it. And then, of course, are the things we talked about, like positive expectations. I think, hey, this famous surgeon just operated on me. I'm going to get better. This activates your brain. You produce endorphins, and then these endorphins reduce the pain.
Yeah. So
Yes.
it's all about our internal pharmacy and being able to know how
Yeah.
to harness it. So I think that you've given a lot of tips already today about how you could try and activate that internal pharmacy within your own body to allow your tissues the best chance to heal themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah. So are there any other little tips that you want to share just before we wrap things up that maybe I haven't asked you about how someone could try heal themselves?
Yeah. It all begins, I think, with inducing the relaxation response. Ideally, you want to do this for, 20 or 30 minutes twice a day. But if you don't have time, there's some simple things you can do. One is let out a sigh. So you can take a deep breath in and just say, right away. Your body's stress will be lower. You can for just one single minute, just close your eyes and count how many breaths come in and how many breaths go out. Um, and Yeah, so those are two simple ways you can induce the relaxation response in the context of a very busy day, a busy schedule.
Mm-hmm. And of course, in your book, you've got lots of actionable, but that's what I love about your book too. You've got lots of actionable bits. So you go through all the evidence and the theory and stories of different things, but at the end, there's always, right, this is actually what you can do now yourself,
Yeah.
which I like too.
Yeah. I was hoping, though, that the book not just do the actions, because there's so many different actions, so many different things we can do to induce our body's inner healing properties. What I would really like people to get from the book is change the way they think. Stop viewing the mind and body as separate, and stop viewing themselves as helpless in the face of health problems. So mind and body are connected, and you can heal yourself from many of the things that we currently seek too much medicine for.
Mm-hmm. And hopefully, we've given lots of examples of that in our talk today.
Yeah.
Jeremy, are there any resources or links you'd like to share now if anyone wants to keep up with your work or follow you further on the internet?
Yes, well, I have a website, which is quite easy. It's just my name, www.jeremyhowick.com. And there's a bunch of resources there that I update on a weekly basis. And I send out a newsletter with some new evidence about every month or two. The newsletter is also on the website, and they can sign up there.
Brilliant. Thank you. And I'll put all of that in the show notes for anyone listening. But I just want to say thank you again so much for your time and all your expertise and all the actionable tips and cool things that you got to share today.
Thank you so much. This has been really fun.